Yeah, that's fine. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Matt. For people that are new, I'm club president. We've got a couple other officers here, Judah and Masa. And yeah, this is a presentation on jazz voicings and chord progressions. So people that know me from the club know that I have a lot more background experience with music theory and harmony than I have with production, because that's just like more where my background lies. So that's usually what I kind of bring to these meetings. But yeah, we can start getting right into it. So jazz voicings tend to be harmonically complex. I'm obviously like not going to be able to get through all of jazz harmony in an hour, but there's sort of three main categories that I was going to talk about, and then a sort of catch-all other category that I will probably not discuss today. So we're going to talk about major chords, minor chords, and dominant chords. Within major chords, you have things like a major seventh, a major nine, major six, which all have slightly different qualities. We can talk about that in a little bit. Minor chords, they sound minor. Minor seven, minor nine, and you can keep extending with the 11. There's the minor major seven. There's the minor six. Dominant, there is the dominant seven. And then some alterations that I can get into. So yeah, this is mostly a focus on jazz voicings from, I have a lot of background as a keyboard player, piano player, but you can voice these chords in other sounds. I would recommend for jazz voicings because they tend to use so many notes and can be very harmonically rich. You would want a sound that is not like too full. Like if you're going to use a more full, rich sound like an organ or like a really strong lead, like you wouldn't want to have a super complex like altered dominant chord. Like that's going to sound really muddy versus like if you use something like a piano or strings, it'll have a lot more space for you to use that chord's richness. Oh, and I should also say, like, I'll pause for questions throughout, but like if you guys ever have questions, feel free to unpause or unmute yourself and interrupt me. And yeah, so the most basic way to voice jazz chords is with stacked thirds. So just keep adding notes in thirds, starting from the root. For example, a major seven or major nine, starting on C, which is B stacked thirds, so C, E, G, B. Piano voicings also tend to be somewhere between middle C and the C below it. You get a really rich voicing sound in that range. Whereas if you go up too high, it can sound kind of thin. And if you go down too low, it starts to sound really muddy. But this is a really nice range. It's also close to like human speaking range, which sort of, I don't know, is the best explanation I have for why it sounds good. A major nine, you just add another third on top of B and you get D, the ninth chord, the ninth note of the C major scale. And it's a very nice, happy, but complicated sounding chord. Then there are minor chords. So I'm sort of doing all of this in the key center of C because it's accessible and it makes, thinking about all of the alterations easier. So again, using the C major scale, but starting on D, you can build a D minor triad. Add C, you get a D minor 7. Add E, you get a minor 9. At G, you get a minor 11, which is a very, very complex chord. If you add B, you're playing all of the notes of the C major scale, but just separated by thirds. And all of them have like a minor quality, but the more you stack on top of it, the more you start to sort of color the sound with all of these other notes. And it feels less like specifically sad, like a D minor chord. Like that just feels like very baseline, like sad. But if you add C, then all of a sudden you have this D minor triad in there with D, F, and A, but you also have a F major triad with F, A, and C. So that combination creates this sort of intermediate chord quality that's somewhere between sad and happy. And you can kind of keep interpreting the additions of thirds on top of that as adding these new triad shapes. You add the E for the D minor 9, now in addition to the D minor triad and the F major triad, you have an A minor triad with A, C, and E. So you could think maybe it's a little sadder than a D minor 7, but still less sad than a D minor triad. I also like to think a lot about like the emotions of chords because I feel like it's the most like tangible way to differentiate something like a D minor 9 and a D minor 11 because they kind of fulfill the same like function in chord progression, but they sound a little different. Anyway, these are the more basic chord voicing, so I won't spend too much time on them. And then this is a dominant 7 starting on G, which is just G, B, D, and F. So a very, very common chord progression in jazz is the 2-5-1. I've talked about it at previous music theory things. It's in the key of C, in the key center of C, starting on the second note, starting on the fifth note, starting on the first note, 2-5-1. So that would be D, G, C. Or if we use these jazz voicings, you could do a D minor 7 to a G dominant 7 to a C major 7. Which sounds like pretty good, but there's still, it sounds a little wonky because you
Sounds interesting. I'm not as used to hearing it without resolving the F to E the way you were just playing it.
Yeah, it feels weird when you jump around like that because
I
like
kind of liked it though.
yeah, you are still technically resolving it because you go to the E in the C major 7, but because like leaping from this voicing of G dominant to this voicing of C major 7, it's so like far that it doesn't really like feel resolved the right way. Which is the next thing I was going to talk about is like voice leading. Is you can achieve a little bit better chord progression, a much smoother sounding chord progression if you change the inversion of the voicing. So like, here's an example of that. We start with the voicing of the D minor 7 chord with D in the root, as I showed before.
Welcome back.
Sorry about that. That was fun. Let me, do I have to restart the recording? Nope. Okay, that's good at least. Cool. Sorry, where did I get cut off?
You're just talking about inversions, yeah.
Yeah, inversions can let you voice a chord or voice a progression with a smoother sound. So because we moved the D and F down an octave, it allows us to, you can even see visually the motions from one voicing in the chord to the next are all in either like whole steps or half steps. So because those distances are so much smaller than before, it feels smoother and it makes more sense to your ears. Does anybody have questions so far?
I guess it's sort of related to inversions, but when would you choose to like layer even more notes, like more octaves of a certain note?
Like if I wanted to add another C on top of this.
Like put another D or yeah, whatever.
That's a good question. It kind of comes down to personal preference a little bit. I'm very used to like voicing things in the left hand, and there's only so many notes you can like hit at the same time. So like that's kind of a limiting factor for me. But in terms of like production, I mean, like the more voicings you add, the richer it's gonna start sounding. So like that's one thing to consider. As we go along through this presentation, I'm gonna mention at some point or another that like, and I may as well just mention it now. You can combine these voicings and pieces of these voicings and voicings of one type on one instrument and voicings of another type on another instrument to achieve different effects. And at that point, it really comes down to experimentation. But yeah, I think that adding like even just one voicing on top of these chords, like doubling the octave, can create a nice sound. Because you have that rub between like B and C being right next to each other, but in context, it's just sort of, you know, part of the voicing and it sounds nice. But yeah, I guess a thing to consider then would also be the closeness of the notes. So as I get through more voicings, you'll kind of see with voicings, you can pick voicings that are closed, voicings that are open, where the notes are closer together or more spaced out. And I I always think of closed voicings as sounding like crunchy because they're always really close together and notes rub against each other more. Whereas open voicings, they have more space, and so it feels less crunchy. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but hopefully it will be clear through demonstration. Yeah, cool. So what do I have next? Yeah. So this was sort of the logical next step out of rooted voicings in thirds or stacked thirds. These are rootless voicings. The sort of jazz myth around the origins of rootless voicings is that Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock were playing a set together, and Herbie Hancock was not vibing. He's a piano player, and he was like just not really vibing. He didn't think the set was going well, and then Miles Davis pulls him aside and says like, "Hey, give me those chords rootless on this next song," which is not what he apparently said, but Herbie Hancock misheard him, and so he played all the voicings without roots, and it sounded cool and possibly changed the face of jazz. But here's an example with D minor 9, G dominant 9, and C major 9, where all I've done is I've taken the D, the G, which would be here, and the C, which I guess would probably actually be down here. But I've taken them out of the voicing. I've added in the 9 up here. Again, we have brought down these two notes in an inversion for smoother voice leading. And I'm playing the roots in the bass so that you still hear them in context. So on their own, it would sound like this. But with roots, it sounds like this. So those are really nice, rich, jazzy voicing, very, I don't know, very classic jazz sound.
So when you say rootless, you just mean that the root is not contained within the like the main voicing, but it's still in the bass. You would still consider that rootless.
Yeah, like you can play It's a lot of these naming conventions come from the context of jazz performance. So a rooted voicing would mean that the piano player is playing the root of the chord in all of the notes or all the chords that they're playing, whereas they would play rootless voicings without playing the root. But the bass player would still probably cover them. Now, granted,
Right.
you
It
could
did
like
sound a lot more rich when you put the bass note in.
yeah, like if you take the roots out, like this is effectively a completely different chord progression, unless it's been given like context from earlier in the piece. Because like F A C E, that's just a F major 7. F A B D is a B half diminished chord, and E G B D is an E minor 7. So without the bass notes, it's a different progression, basically. Which is interesting, you know, it's they have all the same notes. So like in theory, if you're playing a melody over them and you want to achieve a different sound in a different section of your piece, you could switch from rooted voicings to rootless voicings and maybe wait to layer in the bass, and you'll achieve a different effect because it'll seem like you're playing a completely different chord progression, but related. Another way you can play these rootless voicings is this is just like the same chord progression, but with different inversions. So instead of inverting the G dominant 9, I've inverted the D minor 9 and the C major 9. Same way as before, taking the top 2 voicings and bringing them down an octave. And as I mentioned before, some voicings are more open, some are more closed. I think that this voicing sounds crunchier because you have like a half step interval here and a whole step interval here. So you get something that sounds like this. Which I took it up an octave compared to this chord progression, because if I play it down here, it's a little nasty sounding. Like that just doesn't sound like anything. Okay. Now here's some fun ones. So these are a little more, maybe not complex, but like less intuitive to put together. So instead of stacked thirds, an open voicing with root has the root of the chord and the 5th as the bottom 2 notes, and the 3rd and the 7th in some order or another. In this case, it's the 7th here and the 3rd here as the top 2 notes. So the order of, if you were picking like D, E, C, or D, E, I am brain dead. D, F, C, oh my God. D, F, A, C, like stacked thirds. Where if you imagine just taking the F and bringing it up an octave, that's how you would achieve this voicing. And it's a really nice one. It sounds very open because all of the intervals between the notes are larger. So before, the intervals between notes were mostly thirds, so they're much closer together. But here, there's intervals of fifths and fourths. And even up here, it has a really nice chord quality. It feels a lot softer and gentler compared to the stacked thirds. And this is one that I actually do think sounds good when you sort of jump around the keyboard to follow the progression and keep the root in the bottom voicing. Again, this is a 2-5-1, D to G to C. It kind of sounds like a jazz standard called Waltz for Debbie. It uses a lot of those same open voicings with different inversions to keep the voice leading smooth, but again, it gives it a sort of softer, gentler vibe than stacked thirds. If I were to play that down an octave, it still has a very nice quality to it. Still softer, but a little richer because it's down here. Now you can also do rootless open voicings. So here, the bottom two notes will always be the third and seventh of a chord. So like F and C for D, F and B for G, and E and B for C, because those are the notes that would determine the quality of the chord, whether or not it's major or minor, major seventh, minor seventh, dominant seventh. All of those things are determined by the 3 and the 7. And then up above, you have the, in this case, 9 and 5, or 5 and 9. The sort of order flips every time. So here you have F, C, E, A, which for a D minor 9 would be the third note, the seventh note, the ninth note, and the fifth note of this D minor scale. For the G dominant, it's the 7, the 3, the 5, the 9. And then for C, it's the 3, the 7, the 9, the 5. So 9, 5, 5, 9, 9, 5, and 3, 7, 7, 3, 3, 7. And this one is going to be hard for me to voice because I can't stretch my fingers quite that far, but I'm going to try. And again, I put the roots in the bass so that you can hear them in context, but this is going to sound similar to the rooted open voicings, but again, similar to the rootless voicings for stacked thirds as they relate to the voicings with root for stacked thirds. It's just going to sound different, jazzier, richer. I don't know. It has a different quality to it. So these voicings are also nice because they have the two most important voicings, the 3 and the 7, in that really rich area of the keyboard between middle C and the C below it. But it also gets these voicings an octave above, so it kind of adds more color to the sound.
It feels like it was less resolved to me.
Yeah, I think as the voicings get more complex, the resolution just feels less and less firm. You know, you could even, if you wanted to achieve a more solid resolution, you could replace the last chord, the C major 9, with a C major 7, or maybe even just
Yeah.
C. And those simpler voicings feel more like you've come home. Any other questions so far? Alrighty. So yeah, here's another way you can voice the open voicings. So like I said before, it alternated 3, 7, 7, 3, 3, 7. You can also do it the other way. So 7, 3, 3, 7, 7, 3. So every, like, it's still the third and seventh note in the bottom two note voicings and the fifth and the ninth in the top two, but the order of events has been flipped, sort of. So here's what the one I just showed you on the last slide sounds like. And here is what this one should sound like. I can try voicing that down lower too. Let's see how that sounds. See, like when you get too low. Some of those notes fall below the C below middle C, and so it just starts to get too muddy sounding, and it's not as nice sounding. Okay, so now I'm going to get into alterations. So like I said before, the third and the seventh note of a chord determine its quality. All of the notes that you put around it determine the chord's color. So it'll have the same role in the harmony. It'll still functionally be the same, but the color of the sound will be slightly different. This will make more sense once I give you some examples, but basically, yeah, all of the alterations I'm about to show you, I'm going to show you mainly on the stacked thirds, but you can also apply them to the open voicings in the same way. You would just replace the notes with the same names. And again, I tried to do all of this in the key center of C as opposed to using like Roman numerals because I think it's more accessible. So some common alterations for C major. You can replace the G or the B with A. Replacing B will change the chord quality as well. You'll change from a major seventh to a major sixth, which happens to be the same thing as an A minor chord, but just with C in the root. But you can keep G in there. You can keep the 9 in there. You get a very nice sound. And this is one that you can kind of just play all the way up the keyboard. And it sounds quite nice. Here's what that would sound like if I replaced the G with A instead of replacing the B with A. And like a voicing lead into that could be the same 2-5-1 that I've been showing you. What are these other two? Ah, yes. So this is with the open voicings. So that might sound something like this. Or like this. So again, just a similar, like it still will serve the same functional purpose as C major, but it'll sound a little different. The only alteration I could really think of for D minor was adding G, the fourth note of the chord, or replacing A with G. You can get, again, because of the intervals, really crunchy sounding voicings like this one, or this one. But you can also move those voicings around. Get something that sounds like that in context. Okay, so now here's where things get interesting. There are a lot of alterations you can do with a dominant chord. You can replace D with E, and you get a D dominant 13 chord is what it's called, but it just sounds really nice because, I don't know, it's got a really nice sound to it. And again, it makes for good voice leading because it's the same E that you're playing in the D minor 9. You can also do it in the alternate inversion of the stacked third. You can also do it in the open voicings. So those are all options. You can replace A, the 9, with A flat, or A sharp, or both. So these are some of the ways that you can create a G altered chord. It'll sound something like this. If you replace the A with A flat, you go from this to this, which is a really nice sound. It's also the same thing as a diminished chord. I think that's one of my favorite chords, is keeping the E, so that alteration that I showed you here, but replacing A with A flat. It's a very nice sound. You can also replace A with A sharp, which sounds really nasty when you try to voice it that way. I think it works better with a voicing where you keep, like if you were to do the B, D, F, A voicing of G dominant, where you just start on B and stack thirds, but you replace A with A sharp, or even you take out the D entirely. That's a fun sounding chord, and it sounds really good when you add in the last alteration that I was going to mention, which is replacing E with E flat. The very, very, like, the altered chord is like the jazziest sounding chord I can think of. So again, like I said, E flat, A sharp, A flat, all fall within the altered chord domain, and you can create chords of that same effect by adding any combination of those three alterations. So like if I put all three together, you can get something that sounds like this.
Wait, what is E the 11th? Or
E is the 13th. So this would effectively be a flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13, dominant 7 chord. Shorthand for that is altered chord. There's
okay.
actually, oh, I'm trying to remember. If you know the harmonic, oh no, that's not harmonic. I don't remember the name of that minor chord. That is so embarrassing. Yeah. If you know, oh yeah, that's just melodic minor. Yeah, if you know the melodic minor chord, then you can build the altereds, any altered chord from the melodic minor scale. So like for G, all of the notes that are contained in a G altered chord are notes that come from the A flat harmonic minor scale, or not harmonic minor, melodic minor, sorry, which would be A flat, B flat, B, which is the same as C flat, D flat, E flat, G, and A flat again. I think it's easier to start from a G dominant chord and then think about all of the alterations, replacing A with the sharp and flat notes above it and below it, and replacing D with E, or replacing E with E flat. But it is the same
Sounds
thing.
really cool, and
It
you
is a
could
really nice
resolve that A sharp to B, the 7th would be really nice. Yeah.
And it resolves really nicely to a C major sound or C minor sound. Either of those work. Yes. Now I know that's a very complicated voicing. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask.
I don't know if you're gonna get to it in your talk, but I was just wondering about you were mentioning like 11th chords at the very start, and I was wondering sharp 11 goes in the major 11 or minor 11 or both?
Oh, yeah, that goes in the majors. So the reason for that is that, okay, if
God,
I'm
I used to know
building,
this.
yeah. So if I'm stacking thirds starting from C, I get to D and everything sounds good, everything sounds fine. And then I play F and it sounds really bad. And the reason for that is because of the E and the F. That interval of a half step more than an octave sounds really bad. So what people started doing is just replacing it with an F sharp.
Oh, so on the minor scale you have a E flat, and then it's fine.
Yeah. And so then that whole thing works a lot nicer together. You don't have to do that for the minor chord because you already have E flat, yeah, like you said, so they don't row. Yeah, I don't know. The other thing with jazz voicings is like a certain amount is like knowing these voicings is really helpful, but like a lot of the jazz sound does come from like expression and like playing it and just trying things out. So like using these things in production is great, but I definitely recommend like if you have like a small MIDI keyboard or something, just like trying out these chords and experimenting with different things, trying things that work, things that don't work. And you'll just find things that work and things that don't work, and it's fun. I also think that you can sort of divorce yourself more from functional harmony with these complex voicings, because as long as you go from something that feels really tense to something that feels like a release of that tension, it kind of sounds nice. It can be like a non-functional harmony. But it still sounds really lovely. Okay. So this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. If anybody has questions about the voicings in thirds or the open voicings, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. So quartal voicings, as their name would imply, are voicings built from stacks of fourths instead of stacks of thirds. So like if I started from middle C, I would go up a fourth to F, I would go up another fourth to B flat, I would go up another fourth to E flat, I would go up another fourth to A flat. And if I go up one more, then I get no stick clash. So I stop there. And you get this very spacey sounding voicing. And it sounds spacey because it can work in a lot of harmonic contexts. So a single chord of voicing, as I have here, can be used for several different chords depending on where it is voiced. So there are two quartal voicings for a C major chord quality. One is if you start on G and go down in fourths, or start on B and go up in fourths. So again, E and B determine the chord quality. All the others determine the chord color. The other way you can voice it is starting on C and going down in fourths. This one sounds a little closer to a major 6 chord because it doesn't have a B in it, it has an A in it. Whereas the other one sounds closer to a major 9 because it has E, it has B, it has D, and it also has A. Now, these chords, again, sound really spacey. They are the most sort of like jazzy sounding, in my opinion, because of that. And they sound a little more, they make a little more sense in progressions, I would say. So I'll go through the rest of these examples and then show you what I mean. So a chordal voicing for D minor, you can start on A and go up in fourths, or start on F and go down in fourths. And you get F and C, the 3 and the 7.
So is it always like built on the fifth of the chord?
Not always. So like this one is built on, I always think about the note at the top and then going down because that's easier for me to remember. But either way, this one starts on the 3rd, ends on the root. This one starts on the 7th, ends on the 5th. This one starts on the 5th. This one ends on the 3rd. They all kind of like,
I see. So
yeah,
it just built, as long as you build from a note in the chord, it kind of works out. It seems.
pretty much. Yeah, it's just yeah, that's a good point that I should make, is that all of these notes again come from the C major scale. So like B, E, A, D, and G are all in the C major scale. If I were to build one off of like E flat, that's gonna have D, G, C, F, and B flat in it, which are all notes of the E flat major scale. Yeah, same thing here. D minor, again, because this 2-5-1 stays in the key center of C major, all of these notes are going to come from the key of C, the C major scale. For G dominant, you can start on the root and go down, with the only alteration being that instead of an E, you have an F here, so that you get the dominant tritone quality. Which is, because of that tritone, it's the most like that's the only place that this can fit. And so because that's the only place that this chord can fit, it feels more grounded in the place that it is. Like the C chordal, the major and minor chordal voicings, those can move around and they can mean different things in different contexts. Whereas this one always feels tense and dominant and like it's going to resolve to something. Same thing with this one, built on the 5th. And again, the only alteration is that the G has been moved to an F so that you get the dominant chord again. And that's what it would sound like if you resolve to the C chordal chord. So if I put all of those together, the F, or not F, the D minor to the G dominant to the C major, you get something that sounds like this. Again, these are the most spacey sounding chords and require the most sort of reinforcing of the key, either in the melody or in the bass. Otherwise, the chord progression just sort of floats off into space because all of those chordal voicings don't really feel like they are enforcing a specific chord. And those are all of the voicings I wanted to get through. Does anybody have questions about that? Anything that you guys want me to go back and talk about more?
Sorry for the fourths,
Mhm.
chordal voicings. Do you like? It feels weird to me to just like replace the G dominant with a chordal voicing of it, and then I don't know it. Like, how do you fit these into your progressions and like resolve them? Or that's
Yeah,
my question.
I think like chordal voicings sound best with one another,
Yeah,
and stacked voicings sound best with one another as well. Now, you don't always have to voice every note of a chordal voicing. Like I could just take from like C major, I could take the B, A, and D, and that just sounds really nice on its own. And that, because it's smaller and like the voice leading is smoother, I can fit that in with stacked thirds. So like, and that sounds fine.
yeah, I see.
These would also lend themselves well to open voicings, because open voicings have similar intervals between notes, lots of fifths and fourths. So yeah, definitely these are ones that you would want to contextualize with one another or with similar chord voicings that take up a similar amount of like harmonic space. I think these chords also work kind of nicely on like guitar. Like if you're doing like a samba type thing, I don't know, and you've got, you know, maybe more like stacked thirds in the keyboard, like, and then in the guitar you've got like, I don't know. I don't play guitar, so maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there are ways that you can use chordal voicings in one instrument and stacked third voicings in another, to achieve a sort of like cool effect of having like, oh, you've got this like chordal sound over here, and then you've got this much more like rich sound from all of the thirds in another instrument, and they combine in an interesting way. Again, like getting comfortable with these chords would take some experimentation. So definitely feel free to lift these chords from this presentation and try stuff out. Now, the other fun thing about 2-5-1 progressions is that you can lead them into one another. And that's what a lot of jazz does, is like just picking a key center and then saying, okay, we're going to move to this key center next. And you can prepare that change with a 5 or a 2-5. For example, if I'm in the key of C and I'm hanging out in C and I'm having a good time in C, but then I want to go to like B flat, I might prepare it with the 5th of B flat, which is F. Or I might even prepare it with the 2-5-1. So I might be in C major, having a good time. And what I did there is I went from C major 9 to a C minor 9, because that is the 2 of the B flat major 2-5-1. And you can really keep doing that. You could just keep going down in 2-5s. Like if I start on G, G minor to C dominant, F minor to B flat dominant, E minor to A flat dominant. And you can just keep going until you want to resolve it to something. Yeah. That's like a big piece of jazz. Giant steps, which is like historically the coolest and also scariest jazz standard, is just a bunch of 2-5-1s jumping around different key centers. It starts in the key center of B, and then it jumps to E flat. So, and it gets there by going oh goodness. Okay, yeah. Going to the relative 5 of E flat, which is a B flat dominant. Again, this is starting to get kind of complicated, so maybe I should stop going down this rabbit hole. But I can do a talk another time about jazz progressions and why they sound cool. But yeah, using these voicings, using them in 2-5-1s in particular, and in whatever progressions you want in general, will make your music sound jazzier. So yeah, have fun. If there are no other questions, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to stop the recording.